Okay, so John chapter 3 and 4. So I'll start with your fabulous reading assignments. I won't do everybody today. I'm just going to pick a few, answer a few questions, and then we'll get in the text. So starting with Rudolph. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so a lot of you, especially here in chapter 3, right? Towards the middle of chapter 3, where Jesus becomes, kind of, it's like it all starts out like he's talking to Nicodemus. It's all very metaphorical and poetic, and then all of a sudden in verse 15, right? Hold on, let me make sure everyone's muted. Okay. Then all of a sudden, right, starting verse 15, it's like, okay, whoever loves me, will live. Whoever hates me will die, right? It starts to be a kind of very, binary again, right? Us, them mentality, right? So this is where, what I told you before, this is where I think John takes over as a narrator, right? In this book, we have to do that, right? There are places where it is indeed Jesus's wording, right? And very often John then takes over and expounds on it, right? So we can rely on certain places as being really what Jesus spoke, right? Whenever you have a dialogue and so forth, obviously this is going to be right, Jesus speaking. But from verse 15, Jesus is done speaking, right? He's just talked about Moses lifting up the serpent and so forth, and all of a sudden then we get into this heavy theological kind of apocalyptic style again, right? This was not Jesus's style. So we know here that we've entered into the consciousness of John, right? Remember, John is writing in apocalyptic style. He is living in the apocalypse, right? And so anytime in the text, so this would be my perspective on this, or the way I would interpret the text. Anytime you fall into this dichotomy of darkness, light, this is not Jesus speaking anymore. This is John, right? So this whole passage, of course, it's good, it's interesting theology or whatever, but it's unlikely that this is words that Jesus spoke, right? So the famous quote, "For God so loved the world," blah, 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 this is not, according to my interpretation, actually, that's John, right? That's not Jesus. And then he continues, right? Whoever does not believe is condemned. And because he has not believed in the name of the Holy Son of God. I mean, this is theology. Like, Jesus is not going to go around saying, this sounds like, it's very churchy there, right? He has not believed in the name of the only Son of God, and this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, blah, blah, blah. Also, one thing that betrays that is John speaking is the notion of Son of God, right? Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that when Jesus speaks, he refers to himself as Son of Man, never as Son of God, right? So as soon as you have the notion of Son of God, somebody else is now speaking and interpreting, and this is a Greek language also. So I hope this helps, Rudolph. Also, I think Edmonds was really annoyed with these passages. You spoke at length about those, Edmonds, also. Does this make a little more sense here that we have, that this is theology? This is not Jesus anymore. This is John expounding on the words of Jesus, doing theology. Anytime you have this us-them mentality, that's not Jesus. That's John, right? That's his mentality. Jesus was not an us-them person, right? We know that, right? From all the stories. Does that help a little bit, Rudolph, Edmonds? Yeah, Edmonds nodding. Rudolph is chewing. Okay, okay, all right, good. Now, Giannakopoulos just gave me a really good idea today when he started to talk about the notion of the Son of Man, and I think I got it. So I'm going to explain to you guys, based on what Giannakopoulos wrote, this notion of the Son of Man, why Jesus uses it. And it's true, he uses it often to describe himself. Or is he though? Okay, so all right, so let me make it clear so you can see what I'm seeing. Okay. So here's what's going on. And this is also in response to a question that Butterfield asked yesterday. Why is it that so many people were ambiguous as to whether Jesus was the Messiah? Why weren't they able to see clearly based on the prophecies, right? That boom, this is bingo, right? This is the Messiah. Why were they so blinded, right? And so one of the reasons why they did not see, most of them, even the disciples, right, did not see clearly who Jesus was, is because they were expecting, based on the prophetic writings, a ruler, a king, right? If you read Isaiah, when he's talking about the messianic prophecies of Isaiah, this is all about a king who will conquer the nations, who will, make Israel, restore Israel to its good fortunes, right? So they were expecting somebody like King David, right? A warrior king. So what Jesus has to do then is to shift in the people's minds what it means to be, what Messiah means, so that they can better see what he's doing. Are you following me so far? That he needs to shift the mindset, right? Because for him, in his view, this is not his calling, right? This is not the calling of the Messiah as he understands it, right? So, but he's not going to use the word Messiah to talk about his destiny, because the word Messiah is already associated with king, with royalty, and so forth. So he picks the concept of the Son of Man, right? Because he's trying to shift them away from this king Messiah to this Son of Man figure, right? So he's going to use this concept to describe and to teach people what does Messiah really mean, right? Are you all following me still? Okay, good. So when he's saying the Son of Man X, Y, and Z, it's not him, being like Julius Caesar, talking about himself in the third person, like I thought before, right? It is him expounding on what it means, what is the true calling of the Messiah, so that people can begin to put the two together to see what is the concept of the Messiah and how it does really apply to what Jesus is trying to do, right? So his teaching is not that he's talking about himself. He's trying to shift the people's view on who the Messiah is supposed to be. So let's go quickly, briefly. The concept of the Son of Man I talked about last time from Daniel, right? I said that it was more than an individual, it was also a collective, but I want to say something else today. I'm going to go in another direction. Son of Man in the book of Daniel is put into contrast with the beasts, right? If you read, I would really suggest read the book of Daniel if you want to have nightmares at night. It's the perfect book, bedtime story, right? It's a book about it's a prophetic book about all of the kingdoms that were to come until the Messiah would arrive, right? So the book of Daniel book of Daniel was written by the prophet Daniel during the Babylonian exile, right? And this prophet was able to see far into the future, and he saw all of the different kingdoms that would rule over Jerusalem, starting with the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Greeks, then the Romans. And these four kingdoms were symbolized by four different beasts, right? You had the lion, you had the bear, you had the leopard, and then you had this kind of dragon, right? Which was to represent Rome, right? So, and then Daniel foresees another kingdom, which is different than these political kingdoms. It's a human kingdom, meaning it's a spiritual kingdom, not a political kingdom. In the book of Daniel, the contrast between human and the beasts is really a contrast between spiritual and material. So when the Son of Man arrives on the scene with a new kingdom, Daniel is saying this is a spiritual kingdom versus these four political kingdoms, because it is embodied by a human being and not by these animals. This is in a nutshell the book of Daniel. I've just summarized it to you. Everybody follows me on Daniel. This is important. Okay, so Son of Man, when Jesus borrows that concept from the book of Daniel, what he is saying is that my kingdom is not going to be a beastly kingdom, which is a political kingdom, is going to be a spiritual kingdom. That's why, right? He was trying to find a title to describe a concept to describe what he's doing. And the best concept he could find was the concept of the Son of Man, because here, it's a spiritual kingdom, not a political kingdom. I'm going to therefore use this concept, and I will teach people about what the true calling of the Messiah is through this concept. So anytime he's using the word Son of Man, he means for sure a spiritual kingdom. And then, of course, he elaborates throughout the book of John, gives more details as to what this kingdom looks like, in contrast to a political, kingly kingdom, right? So I think each time he's using the word Son of Man, it's a teaching moment. It's not a moment of arrogance, like, here I am, the Son of Man, right, coming on the clouds of glory, right? It's not a moment where he's kind of throwing flowers on himself. It's a teaching moment where he's, again, trying to shift the people's mindset. This is what the Messiah is supposed to be like, and so that they can begin to reconcile what Jesus is doing with the concept of Messiah. Everybody understood what I just said? This is deep theology. Y'all are really, we're going very deep. Okay, Giannakopoulos, go ahead.
I understand, and I actually agree with you, because what we teach is that Jesus came not to rule over the earth, but to teach people how to rule with kindness, love, and humility. And that's what he does, all the way up to when he was crucified. Even when he was crucified, he told them, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And, he took the scourgings, the beatings, the spittings, at all to show people, you have to be humble. You have to, even though you're getting beaten up sometimes, you have to treat people with loving kindness.
Right,
And so I completely agree with you. It's like the exact opposite of what Rome was doing, basically.
Exactly, right? He's contrasting his kingdom with the concept that the Hebrews had at the time. We need a kingdom who is like Rome. They wanted their own Rome, right? He's saying, no, the Son of Man this, the Son of Man that, the Son of Man, trying to shift the perspective, right? Very good. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, because you actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, because, if you say we need another king, like we need another ruler, another fighter, then it never ends. It just continues to go on like that. So Christ was like, listen, you guys are asking for the wrong thing.
Yeah, exactly. He's the first Gandhi or Martin Luther King, right? He's saying the true way to defeat the Romans, right? If we were to look at it on a very down-to-earth level, what he's teaching, he's saying the true way to defeat the Romans is through peace, through love, not through conquest, right? That he was one of the first Gandhis. Actually, what am I saying? Gandhi and Martin Luther King, both inspired by Jesus, right? In their fight, right? They caught on to what Jesus was doing. He was saying the best way to resist is to become humble and loving, and that is how Rome will be defeated, right? Okay. Oh, go ahead. Oh.
With the idea of Jesus being so ambiguous, I think it ties in with his purpose on earth, with being like purpose of being spiritual rather than political. Because like I remember hearing from somewhere that the Jewish people were expecting a Messiah that would save them from like the control of Rome, and like they thought that it would be a king that like frees them and they would have their own land and rule, and like they would be like free from everybody. But like Jesus did like the complete opposite. He like kind of like flipped the whole like world upside down by like just dying on the cross and like being so like the opposite of what they expected. And I think it was opposite because like you said, it was all spiritual rather than political. Like he was fighting something else. And like yeah, I just like agree with that. It's like it makes, and that's why like it just like flew over everybody's head.
Yes.
And like it made like no sense to them until like I guess later on.
Very good. And to add to what you're saying, those of us, right, who are pondering whether Jesus was God, this is one of the best arguments, right? The fact that he reveals himself the opposite of what everybody expected, that's just something God would do, right? So if he had arrived and everybody's like, yeah, that makes sense, it's not God, right? So in a way, this is one small whispered, right? I'm still going to whisper about this theological point, right? This is one small whisper. If Jesus really was God on earth, that would be the best way. That's the perfect. I mean, that sounds so much like something God would do, is to come and like baffle everybody and make everybody like realize that they understood the opposite of what is going to happen, right? So that, for me, the fact that everybody was baffled by Jesus is one of the strongest arguments for his divinity, paradoxically, right? So let me write this down, just if not for myself, because I'm still walking on that path. The fact, let me write this down, this is good. The fact that everyone was baffled, right, by Jesus's identity, is a powerful argument for me. perhaps, right? That's it, perhaps. We're whispering, right? For his divinity, which again, I am never going to affirm because of the messianic secret. I will only whisper, perhaps. Who knows, right? But this would be the strongest argument because that's how God moves, right? It's always baffling and incomprehensible and beyond our expectations, right? And those of us who choose to follow God should expect to be continuously baffled and and disturbed and having to move beyond our expectations. And by the way, Jesus will talk about that today to Nicodemus, right? And so Janakopoulos is saying, yes, very good, right? Again, this is kind of course, it's all the same biblical text, right? Job also was a little too sure of himself, right? And then God just blew him away. And he was just, and then later he understood God is not something that I can. Okay, great. Sorry, my camera just froze. Yes, thank God. Okay, yes, so same thing, right? God was deconstructing Job's concepts of him or constructs of him. And Jesus, in a way, is doing something similar. So there is a kinship, really, between Jesus here in the gospel and the God depicted in the book of Job. There certainly is a kinship between the two. But we are whispering all this, of course. Good. Great. So thank you, Janakopoulos. You really like triggered. It became a lot clearer what he's doing when he's talking about himself as the Son of Man. I was always like that. Always bothered me. So now I think I'm better. I don't know about you guys, but I'm better. Okay. The Samaritans. We'll talk about who they are, why they were hated. We'll talk about that. Butterfield, right? Yes. I'll be calling you all kinds of butters. Let's see, where are you? Yeah, there you are. Okay. So yeah, so Butterfield, hopefully I answered your question. Why did they not see and understand that Jesus was the Messiah? Now, having said that, I want to add, right, that although they were not clear on whether he was the Messiah, he had a huge following. And he had such a huge following that this is one of the main reasons why he was put to death. I just read today the final part of the book of John where Caiaphas is saying, if we do not stop this man, everyone will follow him. I mean, this was where it was going. The whole city, the whole countryside was following him, right? So he had a massive impact. People were convinced that they wanted to be with this guy, even if they were not clear as to whether he was the Messiah. So when we say in churches that the Jews rejected Jesus, it's not historically true, because it was about to come to the point where every single Jew, apart from the elites who had their own issues with Jesus, every single Jew in Jerusalem and in the Galilean countryside was going to be won over by this guy, by Jesus, right? So there was he was drawing everyone to him, and it was interrupted by the elites over a power struggle, right? Who were they going to be if Jesus took over, right? So does that answer a little bit, Butterfield, if you're there?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. All right. Because we do have a misconception, right? The church has been saying for 2,000 years that the Jews crucified Jesus and the Jews rejected Jesus, right? But historically, actually, almost Caiaphas was saying, the high priest was fearing everyone will be after this guy. So the Jews really actually caught on, although it was still confused whether he was or not the Messiah, right? Okay, we'll talk about this. Everybody was writing about baptism today. And then I was like, why is everyone writing about baptism? So I had to reread the text, and I was like, oh, yes, okay. So we'll talk about that. I will answer Christodoulou. Actually, let me do it right now. Christodoulou is asking about this ritual of baptism. So actually baptism, so yes, there is something strange going on. Baptism was used in the Jewish tradition, but only for converts. So if a pagan converted to Judaism, he would go, and it was not called baptism. In Jewish traditions, we still have, this is the mikveh ceremony, mikveh. It's called the ritual bath. They would, even today, the Jews do this. If you are in an Orthodox neighborhood, they all have a mikveh. It's a bathhouse. separated, of course, men, women, and women go every month, and the men go every so often to purify themselves, right? So it's a custom that is probably was happening around the time of Jesus, where you would bathe in this stream of water. Usually the water had to be moving, right? So you would bathe in this water to purify yourself. So a lot of Jews, for example, they do this mikveh, the men, right before the Day of Atonement every year. And the women do it every month to cleanse themselves from their monthly period. So this was probably perhaps already happening then. So when Jesus or John is baptizing, it's not so uncommon, right? It was a way to signify a new beginning, forgiveness of sins. If the Jews were practicing like they are today, they were probably doing this immersion before the Day of Atonement for special occasions. So probably baptism was not such a foreign issue. Does that help a little bit, Christodoulou? Okay, great. Let's see. Okay, let me go to, what did I write? Why do I write so bad? I can barely recognize what I wrote. I think I covered most of the questions I wanted to cover. So anybody want to add anything before we get into the text, these two encounters? Okay, great. All right, so let's go to, I was going to say Genesis. Let's go to John chapter 3. And let me introduce a little bit these two encounters we're about to study. So this is the Pharisee and a Samaritan woman. So I just noticed this recently when I was reading Book of John. I noticed how these two characters are so opposite, right? You have a Pharisee who is in the elite of the, intellectual elite of the Jews, right? And then the Samaritan woman who is kind of a nobody, but not only, she's not even Jewish, she's Samaritan, which is, we'll see, is a kind of a contaminated tribe in the eyes of the Jews, right? So this is kind of the two poles, right? Man, woman, Jewish, Samaritan, Pharisee, woman living with fifth husband or no husband, right? So we are really kind of like, right? And what's so interesting to me is that the intellectual level of the conversation is the same. It's unbelievable to me that to the woman he opens up as deeply as to the Pharisee. Even to the disciples, he doesn't speak like that. So this must be a really intelligent woman that he is speaking to, right? So I was struck by that, how equal the discourse is, how equally profound, equally theologically complex it is, right? So this tells us a little bit already who this woman, what kind of woman she was. Certainly, she was a very intelligent woman, and probably also very beautiful, since she got to marry 4 times, right? So, and for those of you who are kind of shocked about the fact she got married 4 times, this is, if you recall, the women did not have the power of divorce. So it's not her who left everybody. She was not one of these promiscuous people, right? Moving from man to man. It was the men who were divorcing her or who were dying. So scholars actually speculate that she was probably barren. She couldn't have children. So people would fall in love with her, marry her, and she couldn't have children. And so they, usually in Jewish law, you're allowed to divorce if you cannot create, right, some children. So this woman probably was highly intelligent, extremely attractive and beautiful. But because, and scholars speculate, so she was not, like people think, a woman, a low-life woman, right? No, she was probably, the way Jesus speaks to her tells me she's very intelligent, right? Intelligent, beautiful, but because of the barrenness, possibly, or maybe simply she got unlucky, right, with these 4 husbands, she ended up, right, with, and then for those of you who are saying, but she's living with a man who's not her husband. So scholars actually also speculate that probably this is a relative or an uncle or a cousin or something, because it was unusual. There was no domestic partnership in the Hebrew Bible, right? It wasn't like today where you can live with your partner, right? So this was probably a family member that she was living with. Or not, we're not sure, right? But certainly she's a woman of a certain standing, right? unlike what we've depicted so far as her being some kind of prostitute. This is not remotely close to who she was, right? Anyways, but still, right, there's a clash, right? He's a Jewish elite, she's just a woman, a Samaritan, Jewish, and yet the same. So anyways, that was interesting. What's also interesting is that you have in both texts the motive of the water and the spirit, and we're going to talk about that because this is a clue to what is actually going on. What is Jesus teaching in both texts? What is the underlying essence of what he's teaching? If we understand connection, water, spirit, we can understand what is going on. And actually, let me ask you now, where do we see this connection, water, spirit, in the Hebrew Bible? That should give us a clue as to what Jesus is actually teaching here in both of these stories. Where do we see, for the first time, and we've studied this text together, so you guys have no excuse. Where did we see the conjunction of water and spirit? Let's see if some of you get it. I don't have my theologian Anderson today, so he would have found this, I think. But let's see if we can outdo him. Water and spirit. This should sound really familiar. It's one of the first texts we studied. Giannakopoulos, go ahead.
Was it the water is like the new baptism, and then it revitalizes your spirit?
In the Hebrew Bible, where did we study the text where you have water and spirit together?
Is it in Genesis?
Yes, where? Good. You're on the right track. You're getting warm.
When he was creating the earth and he made the firmament?
Yep. Remember, it says let's go there.
Split the two waters and...
Let's go there. Genesis 1. It's the very beginning, right? We have, if I can read. Yeah, this is beautiful. Look at this. The beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Okay? This is where we are. Jesus, or John, who is masterful at, building this text, right? Constructing this text, is bringing together water and spirit, alluding to this moment right before the creation of the world. So what should we expect in both of these teachings? What is Jesus going to be actually saying? I already told you this yesterday about the main idea of the book of John, John 1. So now can you tell me, water, spirit, Genesis 1, what's Jesus going to tell us in these stories? In other words, why is John here alluding to Genesis 1, to the creation of the world, or the moment right before the creation of the world? Why is he alluding to that? What is the symbolic meaning of this allusion? Okay, Christodoulou.
Because it's like a new creation, right? With Jesus, it's like a new beginning out of the apocalypse of Rome.
Exactly, which is what we've been talking about yesterday, right? In the beginning was the word, in the beginning. Okay, here we are in the end of times, the apocalypse of Rome is the end of history. And what Jesus is foreseeing is a rebirth, right? A new creation. Giannakopoulos, I suppose that's what you were going to say. Yes, okay. So we know, right? This is, again, same idea. And I really think this is the idea that permeates the book of John. This book is more about the rebirthing of the human condition than about anything else theological, right? And so again, remember what I told you yesterday, right? I really believe that this rebirth is something that we can all undergo, not based on what we believe, dogma, but based on how we position ourselves, right? Remember yesterday I said, even if you're not a Christian, this rebirth is available, right? This is a universal teaching and we know this is a universal teaching. Why? Because he teaches the Jews, but also the Samaritan, the same truth. Basically what this is saying, well, tell me, why is the same truth taught to both a Jewish elite and a woman who is outside of the Jewish context? What is the point of John to have this teaching go to the woman in Samaria and to the Jewish elite? Giannakopoulos.
Because Jesus' teaching was meant for everybody in the world, no matter who you were, whether you were the elite of the society or the bottom rung that everybody hated. He
Exactly.
even healed the lepers, talked to the lame, things that nobody ever did.
Excellent, right? And I will go beyond. His teaching was not just meant for believers, because he's addressing an unbeliever and giving the same teaching, right? Or unbeliever, quote unquote, because everybody believed in God at the time, right? But she represents, in the Jewish mindset, the pagans, the unbelievers, those who are not part of God's people and never will be, right? So the fact, this is so powerful for me, the fact that Jesus is giving the same teaching of rebirth to the Jewish elites and to the nations represented by this woman tells me that this truth is not just a Christian truth, is not just a Jewish truth, it's a universal truth which pertains to what it means to be human and the potentialities of humanity, right, of the human condition. So this tells me that whether you're a Jewish, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, or whatever, you have access, this teaching is for you, right? And therefore does not depend on what you know. It depends on an attitude, a general human positioning, and anybody in that sense can receive this rebirth, right? So, okay, so please jot this down, right? This rebirth is not just for Christians, right? This is a rebirth that anyone can undergo. And it is a rebirth which is not based on intellectual belief in a certain dogma. It is based on an existential positioning of your being, right? And so today what we're going to see is what are the conditions of possibility for this rebirth? What do we have to do in order to receive this rebirth, to receive this new second breath, right? To receive this, to enter into this dawn of history, right? That Jesus is kind of trying to bring about in this very dark time, right? Okay, so now we're ready, and let's go and see Nicodemus the Pharisee. Okay, notice, he comes at night, and he meets him at night, midnight, right? And her high noon, right? Both are times where there are very little people around. So this should tell us something really interesting, right? That revelation comes when we are alone, or when we can create, right? The conditions for solitude. Doesn't mean you're all alone in your house. You could have a lot of people in your house, but can you create this space of solitude? Because only when you create the space of solitude can you receive this type of revelations that Nicodemus had and the woman had. I think Rumi says this beautifully in one of his poems. He says, midnight, the friend has come, right? This is one of his poems, meaning the friend, by which he means God or the beloved, comes only at midnight, when you have made space, when there is space around you, when there is silence around you. This is when you can get. So again, an invitation for all of us. If we have no moment where we have space around us or silence, we will never really get right? We will not ever get any interesting revelations about life, about wisdom and so forth, right? So this is just to give you a little bit of, just to elaborate on this notion, right? If you want to be someone to whom revelations are made, or who has a spiritual, mystical epiphanies, you have to create the space for that. And the space is midnight or high noon, the time when there is no one, right? Create islands of solitude for yourself, right? Okay, so let's go in the text. Let's look a little bit about what they say. So I'm going to go there. So John 3. Okay. So Nicodemus arrives, right? He says, blah, blah, blah. We know you're important, blah, blah, blah. And notice, right? He's just kind of, we call it in French or in Arabic, it's all the salam aleiks, they're kind of like going and saying, it's an extensive greeting, right? And Jesus cuts him off, right? Gets to the point. Truly, I tell you, right? Unless one is born again, you cannot see the kingdom of God. Okay, let's stop on that. This is, remember, he's speaking to us. So what does it mean to be born again? Now, we're going to bypass all of the evangelical connotations of that word, because we're going to interpret this text in a purely human way, a universal way. So let's ponder, because Jesus is speaking in metaphors, right? This is a metaphor. So what does it mean exactly for us, where we are now in life, to be born again? And how easy is that? And why is Nicodemus resisting? By the way, it sounds like he's, confused. He's not. He knows exactly what's going on, but he's resisting, right? Watch his reaction. Nicodemus said, "How can a man be born when he is old?" Clearly, right? This is a smart-ass answer to the realization of what is involved in being born again. Nicodemus understands perfectly what Jesus is saying, and he is resisting. Right? So that's why he gives this kind of smart-ass answer. And then Jesus continues, right? And he's more precise: water, spirit, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes on into more about the wind, and we'll talk about that in a second. So what does it mean? What does it mean for us to be born again? And can we do it? Is it how? How do we do it? Because remember, this is the prerequisite of receiving the rebirth and the second breath. So I want to know, because I want this second breath. I want this new dawn in my life, right? So what does it mean for me to be born again? And why was it, this is the key one, why was it so hard for Nicodemus to accept it? All right, let's hear you a little bit. So we have Olivera, then Christodoulou, then Rudolph. Go ahead.
I think you kind of have to reinvent yourself by letting go everything that you previously know, and like all your beliefs, your assumptions, and allowed to, I think we spoke about this yesterday, allowed like your old ways to go, and then like let God kind of fills you up, and then live as in the attributes of God, more like, is what I would say.
Okay, yes, right? Everything that defined you, everything that you know, everything that makes you feel, every construct that makes you feel comfortable. To be born again is to go back to being a child before you became that person you are now. It's to kind of undo who you are now. And nobody wants to do that. It's like, who wants to do this? So yes, definitely so it is something we can do. Are we able, right, to leave behind who we think we are and become something new, right? So definitely, are we willing for that? Great, let's see. Rudolph and then Christodoulou.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, I believe it's a humbling of the great Nicodemus as the nobleman, and as the text says, a ruler of the Jews. So he had a rather high position, a man of power, influence, and most likely wealth attached to it, and who was attempting, or at least pretending, to seek wisdom. And Jesus says, and this may be again storytelling by John, look, my friend, this is not about age. It's actually just the opposite. You need to humble yourself, make yourself vulnerable, open yourself up again in order to receive, in order to be reborn mentally. It's more a state of mind than a physical being reborn.
Okay, great. I like that, right? That to be born again, to become like a child, right? To be, again, vulnerable, humble, open to receive. How open to receive something new are you? That's what Jesus is asking Nicodemus. Right now, you are a leader in Israel. You know this, X, Y, and Z. And I am asking you, how open are you to shifting your perspective on who God is and what God wants of you, right? So this is one of the biggest prerequisites of experiencing the second breath, is openness to questioning our beliefs or non-beliefs, right? How willing are you as a human being to question yourself? Okay, I am a Christian and this is who I am. Jesus is saying, if you want to receive the second breath, you need to question your identity as a Christian. And suppose you're an atheist because of X, Y, Z happened. Jesus is saying, if you want to receive the second breath, you need to question your identity as an atheist. Do you want to be stuck in this identity, or do you want to be reborn, right? And many of us, right, we have become comfortable and safe and feel protected by our identity as a Jew, as a Christian, or as an atheist, or as an agnostic. And we have become comfortable And we have made a home for ourselves in these notions. And what Jesus is saying, if you want to receive the second breath, you need to question your very identity. Is being a Christian more important than what I am about to reveal to you? Or is being an atheist something you cannot shed or move beyond? So he's questioning not only the atheistic identity, but the religious identity. Any identity, right, that you have constructed for yourself. I am this. Jesus is saying, if you want to receive the second breath, you need to be ready to be something else, right? You need to be ready to move beyond who you thought you were into somebody completely new. How ready are you for this journey, right? So good. So we're seeing that. Christodoulou, go ahead.
I just wanted to say as well, obviously I agree with what everyone said, but I think I would be more generous to Nicodemus. I think that what he's saying is that not only, not to be flippant with Jesus and what he's saying, but to say, as I have grown in age, I have accumulated baggage, good and bad, identities, good and bad. How can I shed all of these things that I've collected? When you're younger, of course, it's easier. When you have collected less things.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, of course, Nicodemus might not be snapping or being acting in bad faith. He might be genuinely saying, I don't know how to leave behind who I am. Right. So absolutely, he might be kind of resisting, or he might be genuinely wondering, right? How do I do this? Right. Now, what's another way that you talk about baggage, and I like that a lot. What is some other baggages that we carry apart from our constructs in our mind as to who we are? What are some other baggage that we are asked here to set down in order to receive the second breath? What do you think? So beyond the mental baggage, there are other baggages. What are they? Rudolph, you want to try? I know you raised your hand before, but you want to try and answer this question?
Actually, to this subject, look, the minutes before class, we talked about learned biases and ideas that we're learning along the way. My therapist would be very proud of me, because the baggage we receive as very young children is the baggage from our parents. And as we enter education and go to school, or maybe have religious education, we are getting more baggage on the way. And this is what forms us. And as we grow, we kind of have the opportunity to question things and move away and make our own choices, which is very hard at times, because we want to have the earthly rewards. We want to have the home, the picket fence, the new car, all the things that we always want. So we forget about our biases and the baggage because it works for us. It's a vicious circle we're in.
Yeah, very good, right? This is leaving behind not only intellectual baggage, but material baggage, right? Sometimes, right, to receive the second breath, we must be willing to pick up and go and leave behind our achievements, leave behind sometimes our dreams, leave behind our families, sometimes leave behind our wealth and our high position in society, right? So this is what's going on, right? But there's an even deeper one, and I want this one to be answered before I get any other questions. What other baggage do we carry, which Jesus is saying you need to set that down? Who can answer that? Christodoulou, you can answer that? Okay, go ahead.
The first thing that came to mind for me was letting go of your traumas. To love someone, even in a romantic sense, we are so scarred by our past experiences, we cannot fully experience their partnership, you know? And so to really love them, you have to let go of these things.
Absolutely. Emotional baggage, right? What is implied here is we need to be able to be willing to set aside the emotional baggage. So any moment of unforgiveness that we are still carrying is blocking us from receiving this second breath. And the forgiveness is something we have to choose to do. And again, I'm reminded of a beautiful, again, Islam is crossing my mind here with the philosopher Al-Ghazali, who talks about the heart as being the container of the divine light. And very often the heart is covered with impurities coming from unforgiveness, which are keeping the divine light from entering. Right? And so in many ways, our emotional baggage is a block to any type of entryway, right? We are blocking the passage for the divine presence in our beings. One of the biggest blocks for the divine presence to take a hold in our beings is unforgiveness, right? Or hatred, or bitterness, or resentment, or racism, or, or sexism, and so forth. Any type of hatred is going to create a barrier to the receptivity of the divine presence. So to be temples, right, which is what Jesus is talking about throughout, to be temples of God, we have to also be capable of renewing our hearts, not just our minds, right? Or at least being willing for our hearts to be renewed, because forgiveness is also a gift if we are willing to receive it, right? So this is, I mean, this is like, you have to set aside your resentments, your old squabbles, the trauma that you have been nursing, the blame you have been putting on everybody else. These are blocks, right, to this second breath. Can't breathe in this constriction of the heart, right? So I'm seeing here both the mind and the heart need to be willing to set down their baggage and receive something new, right? Receive a rebirth of the mind, a new perspective on who God is, on what being human means, and a rebirth of the heart, where the heart is liberated from the resentment, the trauma, the hatred, and the blame, right, that we put on each other. So this is not easy. I mean, most of us, we want to hang on to our constructs, and we want to hang on to our grudges, right? Because it is a way to protect ourselves. If I keep this grudge, I will be safe from that person, right? And so we nourish the grudge so that we can be safe, right? And Jesus is saying no to what Rudolph was saying. It's a vulnerable position. You're open with your mind and open with your heart, and only then will you be a proper receptacle or vessel for the second breath, right? Or for the divine presence. So there is an attitude we have to be willing to have before this sweeping of the second breath can come in and penetrate us, right? Rudolph, go ahead.
And I don't know if you said it, you may have described it differently. I would also like to add not only the outward forgiveness to others or other things or other circumstances, but also include working on yourself and forgiving yourself for feeling in a certain way, for having done certain things, said certain things, having made mistakes. In that is a tremendous feeling of guilt. And guilt is one of the worst enemies of progress. So if we find a way to look at certain things that we've done in the past and actually can clean them up for our own good, doesn't need to be a conversation with anyone else, we are a step ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And realizing that this has helped me a lot with my past mistakes, to think of it like that this is the journey. This is how I became this person who is now aware that this thing was a stupid thing, right? So being and loving our journey, I think, is so important, right? And not holding on to the fact that I should have, right? The whole journey, remember, that's what the Mother's House is about. The whole journey is beautiful, right? And is an exciting opportunity for the Creator, right? So never to despise our journey and our stumblings, because at each stumbling you have the Creator rubbing his hand in glee, saying, "Ooh, let me do something with this. This is fun," right? So great. Williams, go ahead.
Sorry I was late. I had to get off the train. I have a meeting at 12. I was going to say, basically, you started me to think about the fact that, like, it just requires belief. What he's talking about is it requires belief in ourselves and belief that we can change over a long period of time. Like, I was thinking about, like, the fact that yesterday you got me to watch the video again, right? I mentioned, like, how we become gods, to, like, put that video in the chat, and it talks about how our destiny is to become more than what we are. And the process of that is by just believing that we can do it. So it means, like you said, letting go, acknowledging the fact that, like, you're going to be more than you are, but you're going to make mistakes. And you're not just going to make mistakes. You may do bad things, but the bad things may be in service of something else.
Okay, very good. Right. This is again path to self-development, right? That Jesus is teaching us. Again, but again, this is the difference between Jesus and the self-help gurus, right? Because Jesus is not about self-help. For Jesus, this is something that is given to you. The second breath, the rebirth, the cleansing, the rebirth of the heart, the rebirth of the mind is offered to you. This is something that happens to you, but you have to be willing, right? So that's the difference between Jesus and the self-help, where you have to find ways to rebirth your own heart and rebirth your own mind, right? Jesus is saying, no. This is a wind, right? This is the ruach, right? That will come. And if you receive it, you will renew your mind, and you will renew your mind will be renewed in the passive, and your heart will be renewed. But before that, you have to be like a child, open, willing to leave behind the old, right? And move to the new. So good. Okay. So now just going a couple of words further that Jesus is saying. Now he says something really interesting. Let me just go to the text again so I don't skip anything. So John 3. Okay, tiny print. Okay, so then he continues, right? He says, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is, sorry guys, that which is born of the flesh is flesh, that which is born of spirit is spirit. This is all about the second breath, right? When you use the word spirit, in Greek, spirit, we forgot this, is actually pneuma. In the Greek, that's the Greek, pneuma, which literally means breath, okay? So we have become caught up in the Christian jargon of spirit. We don't even know what that means anymore. It just means breath. So he's here talking about the breath, which was, remember, given to us originally in the creation story, but here it's a new breath because it's a new creation. So anytime you read the word spirit, it's not some kind of, angelic presence. It's breath, God's breath, right? God's breath entering us, right? So he continues, blah, blah, blah. Do not marvel, blah, blah. Now, here's a beautiful quote. I love this one. Let's talk about this one. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. By the way, I think wind and spirit are interchangeable. They're all pneuma, but I'd have to check the Greek. I think it's all pneuma, but the author, whoever's translating, is giving different words. I think it's all the same thing. So what is it? Okay, so now he's talking about the breath of God, right? Which is going to be blown on us. And he's saying this breath, we should be aware. We do not know where it comes from, and we do not know where it goes. Let's stop on that. This is fascinating. What does it mean that we should not expect to know where this moment, this breath will come from, which will renew us? What does that mean? And then we'll talk about where it goes. Let's talk about this a little bit. Why is Jesus saying the second breath you're going to get, this moment of rebirth, you don't know where it comes from? You shouldn't. Don't try to know where it comes from. What is he trying to say? And then I'll ask you, what does it mean that we don't know where it goes? Worse. Okay, Christodoulou, go ahead.
I think it's like multi-layered, right? There's one layer that says, you shouldn't put yourself in the position of God to say that you know where things, enlightenment or this second breath is going to come from. You should not assume yourself like God. Secondly, it's like it should be, we don't really care like where the wind comes from or goes. Like we should be like that with the second breath. We don't struggle and grasp at the idea of where the wind is coming from in our lives in the street. We don't struggle with that idea.
Okay, good. So I love what you said also. We don't know where, we don't know when. We cannot control this transformation, right? I think this is the first point that you're making, Christodoulou, is that this is a rebirth that we cannot control. Very much like Ecclesiastes, right? Just like Ecclesiastes is saying, we have to relinquish control over happiness, right? Over life. Here Jesus is saying, quoting Ecclesiastes, by the way, he's saying, we cannot control this rebirth. This is not in our hands. We can only open ourselves up, but we do not know how, when, where from, and where it's going, right? So it is really here relinquishing control and waiting, expecting this, but we cannot determine when the heart will be renewed or when the mind will be renewed, right? So I like that very much. Thank you. Rudolph, go ahead.
Yeah, and to your and Christodoulou's point, it is again going back to being a child or having the open mind as a child. We, in our daily doings, like to know the rules of engagement. We like to influence our own destiny. That's how we're wired. That's how our society, particularly in a capitalist town like New York City, has made us to become. We know how to run after the bacon. We know what to do and what not to do. And unless we know these rules, we cannot participate in the race. So I see it as being told, look, you may know the rules, but you cannot forge your own path to wisdom. You have to just prepare yourself to be open to it. And at some point, you'll get it. You can't pay for it. You can't plan for it. You can't be the one who is getting wisdom. That's a different entity that is giving it to you.
Good, very nice. Yes, I love the reference to New York and our culture of, control, mastery, and this is really the ability to allow this process to take place independently of our willpower, right, or our efforts. And another way to, the way I've wondered about it is we don't know where it comes from. So God's breath can blow from unexpected places, right? You can be in a conversation in the subway and right, or you can be in a mosque and you're a Christian and or you can be reading some, novel and all of a sudden you have an illumination, right? So God, I think, is not limited, right? The epiphanies that we can have about the spiritual path is not limited to the church or the synagogue. You can have an epiphany by the seaside. You can have an epiphany in a bar. You can have an epiphany when you're high, right? This is all, there is no, God is not going to be like, oh, not here. I won't reveal myself here, right? God has, if you talk to people who've gone through profound spiritual transformations, you'd be surprised as to where God chose to reveal himself, right? And we must, accept that God will blow from wherever he wants. And it can be in a dungeon or it can be in an airplane, right? We cannot control where God will blow from. And this is why the invitation is to be open and to be capable of learning from anyone and from anything, right? You can be in jail and you will receive the breath there, right? Or you can be in a temple singing and you will receive the breath, right? But God is not going to, we have to be open at all times to receiving these moments of epiphanies, because anyone can become the breath or anything can become the breath, right? So now let's look at the second one. Oh, William, sorry, go ahead, Williams.
No, I was going to say but don't you think modern society has taken the mysticism out of religion? So we're in a situation where, because there is no mysticism, we don't treat religion with respect. We treat it as just an idol. Like God told us not to have idols, but we treat religion as an idol because there's no more mysticism in religion.
Yeah.
Because now science has superseded our religion, or become a religion, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely, right? The religion has said we are the only path for the breath, right? And what the text is saying, especially Jesus is basically saying, we don't need the temple to get the breath. He will say this more clearly with the Samaritan woman. The breath is independent of religion. Oh, I like this. I'm writing this down. Okay. I'm getting epiphanies every single second with you guys. The breath is independent of religion, which is why it is for everybody. You don't have to be a religious person to receive this breath. The breath is not tied to religious practice. You can receive the breath in the middle of sinning, right? Or on the verge of suicide, or when you're dating, right? You can receive this powerful transformation, right? So now what about the part where it says you do not know where it goes? What does that mean? That the breath, once it has hit you, you don't know where it goes. What is he trying to say there to Nicodemus? Go ahead.
Maybe it's this idea that you can't control, you can't try your best to hold on to it. You may have once you get this epiphany of the breath, you know, and it feels good, and you try to like try your best to like, oh, because I did X, Y, and Z, I got the breath, so let me just keep doing the X, Y, and Z until like it sticks with me. But like in reality, like it doesn't stick with you, and I think that's what it means. Like it comes where it comes and goes, I guess, depending on it is, because it's independent of like just everything that you
Yes,
do.
I love it. I love it. God comes and goes. You cannot retain, you cannot grasp, you cannot make happen, but you cannot retain, right? God will come and go, and there will be moments where you are kind of on your own, right? You can retain certain experiences. We're invited to have different experiences, right? So Olivera, very nice. Thank you. Go ahead, Olivera.
Say you would have the same experience as Jesus, like a one thing hits you. Now, while you possess, you can also be you can put it out into the world, so you can be, that can come to you, and you can also let it go through you, and you can give to other people. So you are out somewhere in the subway and you have a conversation, you can let that go through you, and you can be part of this motion of the spirit of God, so you can also see yourself as part of it.
Gorgeous, gorgeous. I love it. Splendid. Absolutely. Right? We can become the bearers of this breath too, right? And so once we are hit by the breath, we will be compelled to share in different ways, right? It will depend. Some of us will create works of art. Some of us will have a child. Some of us will begin talking or singing, or, right? So absolutely. And we can become the bearers of this breath to each other. So that's beautiful. That sounds very much like Simone Weil, which I forgot if you studied or not with me, but yeah, Simone Weil says something, if you guys are interested, very similar in Waiting for God by Simone Weil. Very required reading if you want to be a true Christian and a true human being. Great. Okay. Beautiful. Anybody else want to add anything about this breath, where we do not know where it goes? The way I saw it was, we also do not know where God will take us, right? Once we have become inhabited by the presence of God, there's no telling what we will end up doing with that, right? Who we will become. In many ways, people have changed careers abruptly once they've been possessed by God, right? People have changed their relationships. People have shifted enormous things, right? So there's no telling where this breath will lead you. But of course, Jesus would say that it leads you to a rebirth, to a new dawn, to a new creation, and we should not be afraid, right, of moving in the direction that breath is leading us. Wherever the breath is leading us, it is always going to be better than where it's taking us from, right? Some of us, we're still attached. We don't want to leave this thing, this career, or this relationship, or these friends, or these family members. And what the text is saying is, if you're going to be there, it will be you, the dead, burying the dead. If you want a new breath, a new dawn, a new beginning, you have to be willing to go where the breath tells you to go, knowing that this is where you will get the true life, right? Rudolph, go ahead. You're muted.
I'm glad you said this, because I don't think it needs to be necessarily something extraordinary or profound that will happen to us. It can only mean that in our lives, there is a minute change, a little something that will just influence how we are and how we go about our interactions with other people. It may not mean that you change your career or all of a sudden walk barefoot to the North Pole, but it may mean that you are more open to other ideas, that you, again, make yourself vulnerable to criticism. Open yourself up to self-reflection. There are so many things that are just steps in the path rather than the one big boom thing.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. We often talk about in Christian circles the baptism of the Holy Spirit, like it's like a big, huge thing, which happens only if you speak in tongues, right? And so forth. There's all kinds of requirements, right? What we're learning here is that this is an experience which is universal and common. It's an everyday thing that you can receive the breath and give it back. It's like breathing. It's as natural as breathing. You can be in a subway feeling depressed and someone says something that revitalizes you. That's a breath moment. And then you can offer the same comfort to someone over here. That's the breath moment. It's inhaling, exhaling. It's as natural as breathing. It doesn't have to be, I love what you said, Rudolph, because it doesn't have to be spectacular and a one-time experience where you're on the floor foaming at the mouth, right? It doesn't have to be any of this. It can be something as natural as breathing and exhaling, right? And if we are open to it, it will happen continuously. We will receive small miracles, small comforts, little moments, right? And then we will be giving the same to people. And this is what Jesus calls the kingdom of God, right? So beautifully said, Rudolph, that it can be as natural as breathing in and out, right? I love it. Thank you. That's really good. Let's see, who is the other hand? Williams, go ahead.
I was gonna say, are you reclaiming like the Muse narrative? That like the universe has a song and we all just gotta be willing to dance to it, like as almost like a Muse narrative, like because it sounds like they took inspiration from the Muses when they talked about breath. The Muses come and they fill you with inspiration, they fill you with mirth, is the way that they're making it sound.
Yes, I think I love that. I didn't know that, but certainly remember, John is also a Greek, right? He's been in Greece for at least 50, 60 years by the time he's been writing this, right? So he's aware of the Greek thought, and remember, he's also writing to a Greek audience. And so yes, it is kind of like, so you're saying the Muses is tapping into the spirit of the universe, and then tell us more about the Muses. I'm intrigued now.
So the Muses, basically, the Muses were divine inspiration. So like you could be like Rudolph said, if you were standing on the corner, the Muse could come and inspire you to write a speech to stop war. The Muse could come and tell you about math. And the Muses basically, there was like the Muses didn't know what would happen. They just had to be there. And you don't necessarily have to be open to it. The Muses just give you inspiration, and it's random inspiration. It could be anything. It could be tomorrow you decide, all right, I'm gonna go sail around the world. And that's why I said like the way they talk about breath sounds like music.
Yeah. I think you can make this case very nicely. This is also a Greek way to, in the Greece, apparently, this possession by the Muses is a normal thing. So when Jesus is talking about possession by, getting this second breath, it's also a very Greek idea in the sense of getting inspiration through the Muses, right? So nice. Yes, I love that. That works too. Yes, excellent. Okay, let's take a break. We're just on time, so let's take a 5-minute break until 4:50, and then we will go into the Samaritan woman and see if we can learn anything new. It's a similar discourse, but there's a few details that are new. So let me stop the recording.